Hello, 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 and welcome back, Build Stuff 2021. We are in the Saturn stage, and for the next 40 minutes, 45 minutes, you have me. It is my turn to start talking to you about building your own brand with Static Blazor Apps. And this all started sometime last year. I saw a tweet come by my timeline that was talking about building your own brand, that if you blog and you're posting on somebody else's network, then no matter how awesome that network is, I use dev.to a lot of the time, you're still putting your time, you're putting in your effort, and you are putting in your expertise to build up somebody else's place and not your own brand. I thought, well, they have a point. I can agree with this. So I decided to buy my own domain. Actually, I didn't buy one domain. I bought three because seriously, who can stop at buying one domain? So I managed to grab stacy-clouds.net, .com, and .dev. And over the next couple of months, I did absolutely nothing with them because I think it's fair to say that many of us have experienced that buying a domain and using a domain, they're not the same thing. Now, in this particular instance, there was something explicit that was stopping me from moving further, and that was the eating the elephant problem. That is, I had it in my head. I had a whole plan of what I wanted to do. And basically, if I'm making my own place on the web, I am making my own place on the web. I don't just want to get a static site generator and put something out there. I don't want to use a WordPress site or anything like that just with my domain. I want to use it to learn new things. I want to use it to show the world what I can do. Problem with that is it means I actually have to find the time to sit down and do it. And what it's got to do is display blog posts. I need to be able to edit blog posts because I'm using it for my blog platform. If I can edit blog posts, I also need to include authentication because I don't want anybody else to edit my blog posts. It's got to be me. Looking around at all of the amazing sites online, my website has to look awesome and so many other things beside. And I can't do any of it unless I do all of it. That eating the elephant problem. Too much time to build, and I already don't have enough time. But then a few things happened and it brought me back into it. First of all, I started to play with Blazor WebAssembly applications. I also started to play with static web apps inside of Azure. Back when they were still in preview, they've been in general availability since March this year. I was playing with them last year and already saw the possibilities that I could do with them. See, in my day-to-day job, I'm an Angular developer with those 222 megabytes of node modules that we need in order to do Hello Worlds. That's cost me a lot of time in the past. But by trade, I'm a C# developer and have been for quite a few years. And I thought, well, not only do I get to learn something new in Blazor, I also get to just use one language for the API and for the front end. And, you know, it might be nice to give this a try. The other one that helped is when you scaffold a Blazor application, when you just new up a Blazor application, you get an okay solution. It's not the most beautiful thing in the world, but you have something that you can extend reasonably easily. And then to get that deployed, which was the other thing in my head, I don't want to run a web server. I don't even want to have to run an app service in order to do this. I want to keep it as simple as possible. And these static web apps manage to do that for me. I can upload my static content, my WebAssembly files into the static web app. I can use a couple of Azure functions in order to get data dynamically to make it awesome. I can keep it all in one single Azure resource, which I know my organizational capabilities outside of work, and keeping it as simple as possible is a good thing, especially for a hobby site. So I started to build my own site. Now, it is still a work in progress. It will be a work in progress forever, probably. but certainly for a short while yet. But in using these static web apps and in using this Blazor WebAssembly in a language I'm comfortable with, I managed to find something where I can just think, okay, I've got an hour. I'm just going to quickly add something to the site and just quickly update it and move on, rather than having to find all of this time to build perfection from the start. Hi, I'm Stacy Cashmore. I'm Tech Explorer DevOps at Omniplan in Amsterdam in the Netherlands. I've been writing software since the middle of the 1990s. And for the last 2 years, I've been very proud to be able to call myself a Microsoft MVP in developer technologies. Now, enough with me talking and showing you a presentation. Let's build something cool. So what we're going to build today is basically those first couple of steps that I took when I started to write my own website. So we're going to create a Blazor application, Blazor WebAssembly app, and we're going to make an API, and we're going to get some data out of my dev.to account in order to display on our own site. So we want to call this client. And then just to make sure that my GitHub repo works as it's supposed to do, we just need to make sure that we put everything in a very particular place. And that's not the place that I want at all. That's the place that I want. And I do, though, want to call the solution name Blazor Demo. This isn't important for a static web app. This is just important to make sure that everything works smoothly. So we'll go next. We're going to do this in .NET 6, the latest LTS version of .NET. We're not going to do any authentication today. We are going to configure it for HTTPS. We are not going to be doing ASP.NET Core hosted because we want those static files to deploy, and progressive web apps, but we're not going to be doing anything with it today. So let's leave it off, shall we? Let's create that, see how long that takes to scaffold. We'll keep our fingers crossed that the laptop keeps on working for us. Now we have our client. We can add our API in there too. So that's another new project, and that's going to be an Azure function. So this one we're going to call API. Now you may notice I've called the client and the API. There's a reason for doing that, which we'll see when we come to the Azure portal shortly. You can call it whatever you like, but this just uses values out of the box later on. So let's create this. We want a HTTP trigger because it's going to be an API. In fact, in a static web app, that's the only trigger that you can have. And then we have this scaffolded application. Now, the first thing I want to show you how to do today is just how to communicate from the front to the back end. And for that, we're going to use one of the pages which is created when we new up a Blazor WebAssembly app, and that is this fetch data page. Basically, we have a JSON file which is included in the project when you create a new one. And it just runs through that JSON and it just puts some HTML on the screen for us and makes it look pretty. What we're going to do is, rather than use this JSON file, we're going to get that data from an Azure function. So let's create that function. First one we're going to do is, I hate function one. I really hate having anything with whatever1.cs. So let's just rename that weather forecast get. Yes, you can rename the class. And then because you really don't want to watch me do lots of typos for the next 40 minutes, we are just going to bring in a load of code snippets, but I'm going to walk through them with you. First up, for this dry run that we're going to do just to show you it working together, we have a HTTP GET for the weather forecast. And all that's going to do is just return a dynamic array of objects which replicate that JSON file that we're replacing. So this is where we get our data from. Now we need to read that data inside of our client. So for that one, we're going to come back to this fetch data page, and we're going to replace line 44 just so that we get the data from API weather forecast instead. Now, if I was simply to deploy this into an Azure static web app, this would work already. This is all we need to do to communicate with the front and the back end. It's that simple. Running locally, however, we don't have all of that Azure static web app magic happening for us. And we're going to be running this on 2 different ports in order to get this working. We have 2 options for this. First one, I'm going to show you if you have a simple application, you just want it to run inside of Visual Studio and you don't want to do anything out of it. And in a second, I'm going to show you a second option, which keeps your code cleaner. That means that you have to have more things working in the background in order to test your app. So the first one that we're going to do is introduce an app settings.development JSON file. That's a mouthful. And we're going to bring that into our client app in the www root. We want a JSON file. And this is just going to have one property in it. And that's going to be our API location, localhost 7071, standard location for an Azure function. Next, we need to make sure our application knows how to use this setting, and that we're going to change in this program CS on line 9. And what we've built in is this builder configuration. So if API prefix exists, which it will only exist in our development environment, we're going to use it. Otherwise, we're going to use the base address of the application itself. That's what's going to happen inside of Azure. Lastly, because we are using 2 different ports, we need to enable cores for our Azure function. Now, we don't want to do this completely. We only want to do this when we run it locally. So we're going to add a launch settings into our properties for our function. You've guessed it, yet another JSON file. And this one we're not going to call it the file name because that wouldn't work, would it? We're going to add just a profile here so that when we launch the project, we have cores enabled for everything. Now, this is fine because it's only running locally. It's not going to go up into Azure. Last but not least, because we need to run both of our projects, we are going to change our startup projects, if I can find them in the context menu. We're going to say multiple startup projects, and we want the API and the client. And if I've done everything correctly, we can cross my fingers, we can watch it build, and it's going to spin everything up for us. We have the Azure functions running, and hopefully in a second, we are going to have our website running. It's going to take a little bit of time to load first time because it's going to have to download the .NET Wasm development environment in order to go. And here's our application. We have a counter page that you can click, but before I show you the fetch data, I do want to open the network tab because I want to show you that when we come to fetch data, we get the data loaded and it comes from our 7071. We have these 2 things now working together. Now, when Azure Web Apps were first launched, this was the only way that we could do this. But sometime last year, there was also the Static Web Apps CLI released, which is currently in preview, that allows us to not need these files if we're okay running a second command. So that's what I want to show you now. So before we continue, all of that work that we've just done, we've got to undo. So we're going to delete the launch settings. We're going to delete the app settings development. And on the program CS, we're going to get rid of the builder configuration. So I'm not going to show you because we're only in a 40-minute session, but if I hit F5 now, none of this is going to work. What we are going to do instead is open up a terminal. We have my application here, and I'm going to bring across a command. And this command, let's see if my click is going to work for me. We have SWA, Static Web App. We're going to start. We're going to point to localhost 5000, which is the default port for when you run .NET Run. And we're going to say that we have an API located in our API folder. And this will build and run our API for us as well. Last but not least, we have this run command at the end, and that is going to do a .NET Rocks run for the client project. And then this SWA CLI is going to do all of that magic that we find inside of Azure. And if everything goes well and we keep our fingers crossed, we're going to see stuff working in a second. She says, hopefully, come on, you can do it, little laptop. We build it fun. Sometimes you have to run this twice the first time you run it for a new project because it takes a little bit of time to get warmed up. But it looks like it's getting there. She says, hopefully, there we go. Yes, nice. We have our website. Now I'm going to bring this across from the other screen where it loaded. we have exactly the same page as before, only now we're running on 4280. And again, if we open our network tab, this is where the magic happens. This weather forecast data is now coming from 4280. We have that local proxy in order to make sure that we're running on the same URL for the API and the front end. Now, the static web app CLI can do far, far, far more than just this, but that is an entire talk on its own. So we're going to leave that there. Now we're going to go into Azure and create our static web app itself. Before we do that, we do just need to upload some files to Git. So we have added base app. Let's commit all and push this. Yeah, save it. Yep. Now we can go into our GitHub repo. This is my repo. It's currently empty. And if we refresh, we should hopefully see lots of application that I've just added. Good. So if we come into the Azure portal, I already have a resource group that I've made for my static web app demo. There's one already in here. If there's time, I'll be using that for a different demo at the end of the talk. But for now, we're just going to create a new one. So we're going to look for static web app, and we're going to create it. We're going to check the subscription and resource group is correct, which it should be because we created it from the resource group, but it's not always, so double check. We need to give it a name. Now, if anybody's used Azure web apps, you will know that you need a name which is unique inside of Azure, and it can be a bit of a nightmare to make sure that you're not using one that somebody else already has. For static web apps, that's not the case. I can just call this static app, and I can't believe nobody else has ever used this, but it works because the static web app is going to come up with its own unique URL, which we'll see in a couple of minutes. We need to pick the hosting plan. We have a free plan and we have a standard plan, which you have to pay for. It's about €7 a month. It just gives you a little bit of added networking functionality and authorization functionality. For this demo, free one is fine. I'm in the Netherlands, so I want to host my web app in West Europe. And then we need to say where we are deploying our application from. Now, you can deploy from anywhere you like, but if you deploy from GitHub, you get a CI/CD flow out of the box, which again, for a hobby project is awesome because it means it's one less thing that I have to do. So let's sign into GitHub on a second screen so I don't dox myself. Now that I'm logged in, I can pick my organization. I can go to my repo, Blazor Talk demo, and I want to deploy the main branch. Now we got a new thing that we have to enter, and that is the build details. What are we trying to build here? Are we building Angular, React, Svelte, Vue, Blazor, which is obviously what we're doing, a host of static site generators, or do we have a custom app that we want to deploy into the static web app? Well, we're going to do Blazor, so we'll pick that. And then we need 3 pieces of information. Where is the client? Where is the API? And where is the output? Well, because we use client and API in our project names, we can leave these as they are. The output location, as far as I can see for a Blazor application, doesn't matter as long as it's not a folder that already exists. The magic happens in the build pipeline, and that's okay. If you're doing something like Angular, it's a lot more important to know where your output folder is. And if you're going to be doing that, I suggest look at the documentation to find out what you need. Right, let's create this now. Create. Don't forget to click the button, Stacy. Now, unlike some resources, this gets generated almost instantly. There we go. It's there already. And here is our static web app. We have a URL, a yellow beach. That's not a bad beach. It's nice yellow sand, nice and golden in the evening sun, with a load of numbers behind it to make sure that it's unique. And if we click on this, now that's interesting. I wasn't expecting that to happen because that shouldn't have happened. This is a brand new resource that I've just created, and it can't possibly have been deployed yet. And yet there it is. Let's have a look in GitHub. That's interesting. I ran through this earlier on today to make sure that it was going to work. And apparently, even though I deleted the static web app, it kept the link to my GitHub repo and it's kind of just connected it directly across. What you were supposed to see there is a screen saying your Azure static web app has been created and it is waiting for your content. And I was going to show you where the content comes from. Well, this is where it comes from. When you create a static web app, it creates a GitHub workflow for you, which will build and deploy your static web app without you having to do anything. It does it on a push to the main branch so that it's a CI/CD flow. Every time you make a change, it updates. And it's even got workflow in there for staging environments, which we might come to later in the talk. We might not. Anyway, we have a website available and it's working. And if we open up our network tab and we refresh our page and go to fetch data, I just want to show you that this really is coming from this same place, Yellow Beach 045, etc., etc., etc. So we have our application in just a couple of minutes, created, uploaded, and there. Right now, though, it's not shouting a whole lot about me. So let's change that, shall we? So what we're going to be doing is we are going to be getting data from dev.to. So I'm going to bring in this API here just to show you. Dev.to has a fantastic API for extracting data. And if I run this, you get a page full of JSON data with the blog post, which I have published on my dev.to account. And what we're going to do, we're going to get this. And for a first step in building our own place, we are going to build a page which lists our blog posts and allow our users to go to it. So let's get back to our application and start making some changes. Let's close all these windows because we don't need them. And let's do a pull because otherwise our local branch is going to be out of date with that GitHub workflow. Now, the first thing that I really want to do here today is just do a little bit of cleanup because we've got a load of things at the moment that we don't need. So that weather forecast is gone. We can get rid of the counter because that doesn't tell that much about me. Can get rid of the fetch data. That doesn't show that much about me. In our shared folder, you may have seen down the left-hand side of the screen, we had that nice menu out of the box. Well, we've got rid of the counter and we've got rid of the fetch data. So we're going to clean this up a little bit. Just get rid of the stuff that we don't need. And finally, we're going to change our index page because we don't want hello world. We want something slightly better than that. So let's have a page title of hello build stuff. And then let's bring in some extra information. Oh yeah, just some stuff that we actually want there. So we'll get rid of this survey prompt and we'll just say how to build your own brand one step at a time, and then just a little bit of blah, 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 blah underneath. Now we can start to get into the good stuff. So number one, we need to get our data from dev.to. And for that, we're going to create an Azure function which gets the data, converts the data to a format that we want, because I don't want my website to rely on dev.to's data format, and pass it back to us. So seeing as we already know that we're going to have two models in here, the first thing that we're going to be doing is adding a models folder. And we're going to add two models. The first one is a text post summary. So this is my generic text post that I'm going to be passing to the front end. Even if I have a different backend at some point, I don't want to have to update the front end. So let's get this generic model in. And we're just passing in basic information, ID, blog URL, title, description, cover image, when it was published, stuff that we might want to use in a summary context. And next, we need to get that model for the dev.to. So we're going to add another class, and that's going to be dev.to blog post summary. Now, this one's going to look fairly similar because we're only taking a subset of the data. We just have some JSON property names in there so that we don't have to have weird names inside of our class. We can keep it nicely C# and nicely JSON property names separated. Next one that we need to do is convert between the two. Now, in a production environment, I'm going to be using something like Automapper for this. I'm not going to write my own. However, setting up Automapper takes time. So I am actually going to add an adapter class for this. So that's going to be a blog post summary adapter. Just because I like giving myself tongue twisters when I'm doing a demo live on stage. So this is a really simple one. We're passing in some JSON input. We're going to deserialize that into an IEnumerable of dev.to blog post summaries. And then for every summary that we have, we're going to create one of our internal summaries so that we can pass that back to the client. The last thing that we need to do here is actually create that Azure function itself that gets all of this put together and gets our data available. So we want a new Azure function. We're going to call that blog post without the space at the end. We want a HTTP trigger. And then we've just got one last code snippet that we're going to bring across. Again, we're running a HTTP GET here. We don't want to open this up for post. And we're going to run this as blog posts as the root, API/blog posts. It's going to new up a HTTP client so that we can talk to dev.to. I'd probably use dependency injection in production for this. Again, for demo, I'm not setting that up. And we're going to get all of the articles for Stacy Cash, for me. We're going to run those through that adapter that I've just made, and we're going to return them to the front end. Quick build to make sure I've not done anything bad. And we can now close our API, and we can move on to our client. I'm also going to close all of these tabs. Now, for our client, we have a few steps that we need to do. We need to have a service which is going to get that data for us and cache that data for us. We don't want to do a request to this API every time we visit the blog post page. And then we actually need to put that data on the screen. And if we have time, we're also going to put a summary on the front. So number one is adding this data service. And again, the first thing that we actually need is a model because we're getting data that we need to know how to interpret. Again, in my actual site, I have a shared project for this, so I can share my models between the front and back end, at least the models that I want to share between the front and the back end. But setting up an extra project, that still takes more time than simply copying the model a second time. So for the demo, we're going to live with that. So here we just have, again, that ID, blog URL, title, description, cover image, and publish stat with the nullable enabled because I'm running in a .NET 6 project here and nulls are enabled, and otherwise things go a little bit manky. Next, we need to add our service, the bit that's actually going to call our API. This is a bit that stops us doing more requests to the back end than we really need. So we're going to make a services folder. And we are going to add a new service here. So we want a class. And we're going to call that blog post summary service. Because again, I like tongue twisters. Now, this has a couple of important things. Number one, we have this blog post summary at the bottom. It is a list of blog post summaries, and this is what we're going to make available to any page or component that wants to use this data. Then we have load summaries, and this is something that we can call where we say, if we don't have any summaries yet, or if we say we really want to get new ones, then we're going to make that call to the back end. And otherwise, we're just going to fall out. It's fine. We'll leave. And last but not least, in our constructor, we're passing in a HTTP client because we're in the client app here. And as we saw at the beginning, we already have a HTTP client in dependency injection. So let's reuse that. Last but not least, we want to use this also as an injectable service that we can just put into any component that we want. So we're just going to add it to the DI container here. And we're going to use Control-click just to bring it in so that everything's there. Again, a quick build to make sure I've not done anything wrong. And we'll move on to actually displaying this stuff on the screen. So for this one, we're going to make a new page and we're going to make a component to display each summary. First thing we're going to do is make the new page. So let's come into here. And we want a new Razor component, not a new Razor page, a new Razor component. Call it blog posts. And if you look at the code that we have for this, we have this line at the top, the @page directive that just says, when blog posts is called, load this component. We have a link to a service. Ignore the squiggly lines. We're going to fix those in a second. And we're going to say, if we don't have any summaries, if they're null, then display a boring loading ... sign. We'll make it pretty in the future. And otherwise, put every single summary that we have on the page using that blog post summary component. Now, we need a little bit of code behind to make this work. And it's a Razor page. I could put this in a code block in the page itself. I personally prefer code behinds for some code. It's entirely up to you what you feel most comfortable with. And this code behind is just going to be responsible for calling that service. So we inject the service that we've made, and on initialized of our component, we're loading the summaries. We're not forcing a reload. We just want to get the data it already has. Last but not least, in order to get this bit working, we need to actually make our component itself. How are we going to show this on the screen? Well, we're going to have a components folder. And inside of that components folder, we're going to make our blog post summary component. So it's another Razor component, exactly the same as a page. It's just not going to have that page directive at the top. And this is just simply going to have a div with the title, description, and a link to the URL that we're going to open in a new page so that people can read our article. Here I do have a nice code block at the bottom because it's only accepting one parameter. It doesn't make sense to do a code behind here. Now, if we go back to our blog post page, we see that we've still got a green squiggly line here. And that's because we don't know where to find that component. Now, I can bring in a using statement at the top of my file here, but you know what? I'm probably going to be using these components on more pages than just one. So Blazor has this awesome underscore imports. It's kind of like the implicit imports and global usings that you have in C#10 these days. And if we put that in there, we can see that we still have everything available to us. So let's do a quick build, and that has failed. Why has that failed? I've obviously done something stupid at some point. There we go. I've deleted something I didn't mean to delete. Now, one final thing that we do need to do before we deploy is we need to change our navigation menu because we want to give our users a way to navigate to this page. We don't want them to have to remember to go to my website blog posts, I believe it was. If I can't remember it, my users aren't going to remember it. Let's give them a navigation link. And that's it. This is all that we need for our first step. So let's get this pushed up to GitHub. Add blog post summaries. We're going to commit all and push. We're going to make sure that it pushes OK. Yep. And then if we go back to our actions, we can see we've now got this third action started. That is our CI/CD kicked off instantly, ready to go. Now, this is going to take about 3 minutes to deploy. While we're waiting, two things that I want to show you. One is how to get a better URL available to us. And the other is just to show you this working locally. So if we have a look at our client, the one that we've just created, we have this yellow beach 045D4FE03 staticapps.net. Now, that is not the URL that I want for my domain. I want something that says something about me. I do like the yellow beach. I don't like the rest of it. Well, in our static web apps, we have the ability to set custom domains. Now, if I come into my pre-built static web app, we can go to the custom domains down the side, and we can add a new domain here. So I'm going to add Stacy-clouds.com, the second of my 3 websites. And if I do this, I'm told that I need to add a CNAME record to the DNS, which I've already done before because I'm not going to do that in the middle of a demo. And if I add this now, there is a chance, so far I've got about an 80-20 hit rate on this, that this is going to get set up in time and I can show you this running underneath my own URL. Now, if you don't have things set up, you're going to get a couple of different error messages. Either you're going to get an error message saying there is no CNAME for this account, or you're going to get one saying there's a CNAME, but it's not pointing to this app, so you can't use it. They're reasonably descriptive, so if you get it, you can kind of check what you need to do. This can take time. The worst that I've had is it's taken about 6 hours for the DNS records to propagate. Best case that I had, it took about 10 minutes. So your mileage may vary. I believe it can take up to 48 hours is the official thing when you change your DNS record to getting this working. So while that is all deploying, our action's still running, what I want to do is come back to my static web app here, and we can see, although I'm in .NET 6 and I have hot reload enabled, I have made so many changes, it cannot cope with it. And here we have kind of an issue with the static web app CLI at the moment. If you get this message on every computer I've tried it, it just locks up and won't do anything. You can say yes and nothing happens. So we're just going to kill that process and we're going to restart it. And hopefully this should build a little bit quicker than last time because it should be kind of pre-warmed. Should is always a good word. There we go. So let's open the client again. And now what we have is our application. We can get our blog posts and we can open in a new one. So again, that's all running using that static CLI. If you're going to have a go with static web apps, seriously look up the static CLI too. It is a fantastic piece of kit. How we're doing with our action. Of course, it's not finished deploying yet because that would be useful. Let's see how far along we are. 3 minutes 29. It should be about there. It's generally about 3 minutes or so. It'll get there soon. The other thing that you get when you use a GitHub action for static web apps, if I have a look at the workflow, let's have a look at the workflow file. I can see that that's now finished because I've started talking about something else. When you make a pull request, this workflow also gets triggered. And what's really cool about the pull request workflow is it spins up an entirely new environment for you so that you can actually check your static web app in a production-like environment before you actually push to production. Now, this also has a couple of provisos with it. Number one, if you're talking to backend databases and things, obviously that's not going to be replicated. You're always going to talk to the same backend database. Number two, the staging environments at this moment are open to the world and you cannot close them. At least that's the last that I read. So make sure that if you're making a staging environment, it isn't something that you mind somebody seeing before you move into production. For a hobby site, obviously it's fine. For something in the office, maybe some you got slightly secret, maybe you don't want to be using these staging environments. What is really cool is when you close a pull request, it also tears down those environments for you and cleans everything up behind you. Now, when we created our static web app, I said there was 2 levels. You had the free and you had the standard tier. One of the differences there is, I believe for the free tier, you have 2 staging environments. For the standard tier, you have 5. So if you know you're going to be making lots of changes and you need lots of staging environments, that can be a reason to think maybe I need to spend some money here. Right, let's go back to our web app now and refresh it. And that's interesting. Oh, why isn't that working now? I love it when these things happen. Now that's cool. That's an entirely different URL. I think I maybe clicked on the wrong thing, before. I wasn't showing you what I just deployed. But what I can show you is that we now have delightful water. We have Hello Build Stuff as our page title. We have our blog posts available to the world. And when we click on them, we can open up in a new window. People can read your blog posts and you have started that first step to your own site. Now, it's not pretty yet, but this is actually quite a flexible layout that we have here. What I want to show you very quickly is just my actual website, because I am still using plus minus the original Blazor scaffolded application. But just with playing with CSS just a little bit, you can actually make it look fairly cool. And you can take that next step. And with the day I've had with computers today, this is definitely the right article to open. Sometimes things go wrong. And we can start to actually get things available in our site looking okay fairly quickly. Now, before I return to my talk, let's just see what's happening with our custom URL. Is that available yet? That is available. It's ready. So if we go to stacyclouds.com now, we have the application available, ready for the world. So in the last 40 odd minutes or so, we've created a website. We've got data from an external source and we've deployed it to a production environment with a custom domain. And we've seen that we've got a workflow that allows us to make changes in the future. Like I say, we still need to make our website pretty and we still need to add more content, maybe fix all those canonical URLs so that our own brand is the brand that the world sees and not our dev.to brand. But I hope that you can see that by using this technology, you can really start to build that brand without eating that elephant at the start and without having to change your existing resources right when you're at the beginning. Now, if this has inspired you to give it a go for yourself, please have a look at the QR code, which is on the screen right now. That will take you to MS Learn for the static web apps, where you can walk through and give this a try for yourself. If you don't feel like giving static web apps a try, still go to ms.learn, because seriously, if you are a Microsoft developer, there is a world of awesome information available for you there. Well, that was what I had to show you today. Thank you so much for your time. And let's have a look at what we've got in the comments section if you've got any questions or so. So we have, hey, Denny, thank you for watching. And Lemon, thank you for staying and watching. It's an amazing talk. Thank you so much, Denny. I appreciate that one. And we have some applauses. I'm afraid I am not going to be in the Zoom meeting for the Q&A with the speakers after the session, because I've got to come back in 20 minutes and speak to the last speaker of the day on this stage. If there's no more questions in the chat, then I'm going to say, have an enjoyable break, everybody, and I'll see you later. Bye-bye.